Logan Carter moved through the lobby of Carter Innovation like a man on rails. The marble floor caught the morning light and threw it back in clean, expensive angles. An espresso cup warmed his palm, a thin folder pressed against his forearm, the edge sharp enough to remind him not to relax. Above, an elevator chimed, crisp and impatient. Somewhere behind the reception desk, a phone rang twice, then went quiet. His own phone would not stop vibrating. The buzz came in quick bursts, like an insect trapped under glass. Slack pings, calendar alerts, a string of messages from Patrick that kept stacking up without a pause. Logan did not check them. He already knew what they would say. Investors were upstairs. A signature was due. Time was money. And money was momentum. He adjusted his tie once, more habit than need, and kept walking. Near the glass exit doors, the security sensors gave a soft beep when someone passed too close. The sound was familiar, part of the building's heartbeat. Logan's shoes clicked in a steady rhythm. His reflection slid along the dark glass panels beside him. Tall, controlled, 30 years old. The face people trusted with their capital. Outside, the city moved in wet streaks. Last night's rain had left the sidewalk darker than usual. Taxis hissed past in the street. A gust pushed a spray of cold air against the door. Then something small shifted on the other side of the glass. A child stood there, close enough that her breath fogged a faint circle on the door. She wore a red coat that looked a size too big, sleeves swallowing her wrists. A colorful backpack hung crooked on her shoulders. Curly brown hair framed a face that was too serious for her age. Her eyes, wide and steady, tracked the lobby like she was counting exits. Logan slowed, scanning for an adult. No one. A man in a suit crossed behind him, talking into an earpiece. A woman in heels pushed past, eyes on her phone. The receptionist smiled at a delivery guy and signed a clipboard. Nobody looked toward the girl. Nobody claimed her. Logan's stomach tightened. The image did not fit this building. Children did not wait alone at corporate doors. He stepped closer. The motion sensor beeped again. The girl did not flinch. She watched him come the way a patient animal watches a hand it is not sure will feed it or strike it. Logan reached for the handle and opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Street noise spilled across the polished lobby. Horns and voices, and the low rumble of buses. He crouched, lowering himself to her height, keeping his tone gentle and his face neutral. The folder slid against his knee. "Hi," he said. "Are you lost?" The girl's mouth curved into a small smile. One of her front teeth was missing, the gap bright against her lips. She rocked on her heels like she was holding excitement inside her ribs. "No," she said. Her voice was soft, practiced, like she had rehearsed it. "I came to look for you." Logan blinked once. "Me?" He glanced back into the lobby, as if someone might be filming a prank from behind a plant. "How do you know who I am?" She lifted her chin. The backpack strap creaked as it shifted on her shoulder. "There's a picture of you inside my mom's diary," she said, each word careful. "She cries every night, holding on to it, but never told me why." The sentence landed like a hand closing around his throat. For a beat, Logan forgot the elevator, forgot the investors, forgot the buzzing phone in his pocket. The lobby sound thinned to a distant hum. Even the air felt different, heavier, as if the building had taken a slow breath. A picture of him in a diary, crying every night. His mind reached for explanations the way it reached for solutions in a crisis. Former employee. Fan. Someone's child sent here by a bitter adult. A misunderstanding. Anything that did not make his chest hurt the way it suddenly did. But the girl's gaze did not waver. There was no mischief in it. Only certainty and a strange, bright honesty. Logan's eyes stung before he could stop it. He swallowed hard and tasted coffee, turned sour. He forced his voice to stay steady. "Who's your mom, sweetheart?" The girl answered like the name meant nothing more than a label on a lunchbox. Grace Bennett. The lobby came back into focus and hit him all at once. Grace. The name did not belong in this building. It belonged to late nights in a small apartment with cheap noodles and borrowed textbooks. It belonged to the smell of paint on her fingers and the way she used to tuck her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. It belonged to a door closing 5 years ago without a slam. Just a quiet click that had echoed in him ever since. Logan felt his mouth go dry. His tie suddenly felt too tight. "Grace Bennett," he repeated, as if saying it could make it less real. The girl nodded. Yes. He stared at her face, and something in him shifted. A familiar tilt to the head. A crease between the brows when she concentrated. The shape of the eyes, large and direct. Not Grace's brown, not his own gray. Green. A sharp, clear green that punched straight through his denial. His heartbeat became loud enough to feel in his fingertips. He made himself ask the next question, because avoiding it would not make it disappear. "And what's your name?" She smiled again, proud. "Ellie," she said. She held up one small hand, fingers spread wide, like a school lesson. "I'm 5. 5. Logan's brain did the math without permission. The number slammed into a timeline he had tried not to revisit. 5 years since Grace left. 5 years since the last argument. 5 years since he had watched her walk away and told himself he deserved it. His phone vibrated again, urgent and insistent against his thigh. He did not move. Ellie shifted her weight. Boots squeaking faintly on the lobby mat. Logan looked around, scanning the sidewalk, the street corner, the line of parked cars. Still no adult, still no one reaching for her hand. "You came here by yourself?" he asked, the edge of alarm breaking through his control. She nodded like it was obvious. "I know the way," she said. "I wanted to meet you." Logan's throat tightened. The idea of a child navigating the city alone made his skin go cold. "Does your mom know you're here?" The girl's eyes flicked down for the first time, then back up. "No," she said. "She's working." Logan's fingers curled around the folder until the paper inside crinkled. He felt the ridiculous urge to call security, to call the police, to call someone older and more qualified to handle this. But Ellie's small face held him in place. She took a step closer, lowering her voice even more, as if the glass walls could overhear and punish her for telling the truth. "There's a picture of you inside my mom's diary," she repeated, slower this time. "She cries every night, holding on to it. I saw your face in the newspaper." Logan's eyes burned. A tear slipped out before he could stop it. He blinked hard, embarrassed by his own body, by the way grief and guilt had waited years to find a crack. Ellie watched him with the calm curiosity of a child, seeing an adult break a rule. "Why do you make my mom cry?" she asked. "Did you guys fight?" The simplicity of it nearly shattered him. Logan opened his mouth. No sound came out. Behind him, the elevator chimed again. A sharp ding. A reminder. A deadline. His phone buzzed. Another message. Logan stayed crouched in the doorway, with cold air brushing his face, the city noise rushing past, and a 5-year-old girl in a red coat holding his life in one quiet sentence. Logan stayed low in the doorway, the cold air sliding under his collar, his pulse thudding in his ears. The girl's red coat looked brighter against the gray sidewalk, like a flare someone had fired straight into his day. He forced himself to breathe through his nose, slow and quiet, like he did before walking into a room full of investors. All right, he said, keeping his voice gentle. You can't be out here alone. We're going somewhere safe while we call your mom. Ellie's gaze lifted, measuring him with unsettling calm. Mommy's busy, she said, as if that solved everything. Logan's phone vibrated again. He ignored it and reached behind him to pull the glass door wider. Come inside for a second, he told her. Just so you're not on the street. Ellie stepped over the threshold without hesitation. The lobby's warm air wrapped around them. The security sensor beeped softly. A few heads turned, then turned away. People assumed children belonged to someone else. Logan guided Ellie toward a quiet seating area near a potted tree. The leather chair swallowed her small body when she climbed onto it, her backpack slipping off one shoulder. She kicked her feet lightly, the soles of her boots tapping the chair edge. He sat on the low table opposite her, close enough to hear her, far enough not to crowd her. Ellie, he said carefully, where is your mom working right now? At a diner, she answered. She makes sandwiches and coffee. The word diner hit him harder than he expected. Grace, who used to correct his pitch deck grammar and laugh at his terrible cooking, now serving coffee while crying into a diary at night. Logan's tongue felt thick. He tried to keep the questions from pouring out like a spill. What diner? Ellie squinted, searching her memory like she was looking at a sign. Bluebird, she said finally, proud of the answer. The Bluebird Diner. His chest tightened around the name. Bluebird, a thing Grace would have chosen. Small, stubbornly cheerful, pretending to be light while carrying something heavy. Logan glanced toward the elevators. Through the glass, he could see his assistant at the far end of the lobby, a sharp silhouette with a tablet, scanning for him. In a few minutes, she would find him and pull him back toward the meeting like a hook. He looked back at Ellie. Her knees were scabbed in the way of active children. Her curls held tiny beads of moisture from the street. Her eyes stayed locked on his face, waiting, almost daring him to pretend her question didn't exist. Do you have a phone number for your mom? Logan asked. Ellie shook her head. No, I'm not allowed to touch her phone. Of course. Grace would keep boundaries even with a child. Logan swallowed. Okay. Then we're going to call someone who can help. But first, he stopped himself. The next thing he wanted to ask was not for Ellie. It was for him. It would be selfish to dump his panic into her small hands. He shifted tactics, the way he did when a negotiation got too hot. Slow down. Stabilize. Offer something simple. Are you hungry? He asked, watching her face. Ellie's expression brightened instantly, like the sun slipping through clouds. Yes. What do you like? Strawberry juice, she said, as if it was the most important truth in the world. Logan nodded once. All right, there's a diner nearby. We can sit where it's warm, and we can figure out how to get you back safely. Ellie hopped down from the chair and grabbed her backpack straps with both hands. She followed him without fear. That was the part that scared him the most. As they walked, Logan's phone buzzed again. He pulled it out, thumb hovering over Patrick's name, then slid it back into his pocket like it was burning him. He texted his assistant instead. One short line. No explanation. Emergency. Delayed. He could almost feel the consequences stacking up in the background, like dominoes waiting for a tap. He kept walking anyway. Outside, the air smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust. Ellie took his hand without asking. Her fingers were warm and small, and the contact sent a shock up his arm. Logan tightened his grip, not hard, just enough to remind himself she was real. The diner sat on the corner, bright under fluorescent lights. A bell chimed when they entered. The scent of frying butter and coffee rushed at him, thick and comforting in a way he didn't deserve. They slid into a booth near the window. Ellie immediately climbed onto the seat, knees tucked under her, chin above the table like she owned the place. A waitress approached with a notepad. Logan ordered strawberry juice before Ellie could open her mouth. Ellie grinned at him like he'd passed a test. Logan stared at the laminated menu without seeing a single word. His reflection floated in the window glass, superimposed over passing cars. The image looked steady. His insides were not. The waitress set down the juice. Ellie grabbed it with both hands and took a long sip, eyes closing with pleasure. She swung her legs under the table, humming softly like the world was exactly as it should be. Logan watched her drink, the curve of her cheek when she swallowed, the way her eyelashes lowered when she blinked. Details he didn't have a right to catalog, but his brain did it anyway, greedy and desperate. "How did you find my building?" he asked quietly. Ellie wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I took the bus," she said. "Mommy takes it." I watched. Logan's stomach turned. "You rode the bus alone?" Ellie nodded. "I'm smart." The pride on her face made his chest ache. Grace had taught her competence as armor. A child should not need that kind of armor. He lowered his voice further. "Ellie, you can't do that again. It's dangerous." Ellie shrugged, unconvinced. "But I wanted to meet you." The words landed differently this time. Not like a threat, like a longing, like a gap in her life that she'd decided to fill with her own tiny feet. Logan's throat tightened. He leaned forward. "Does your mom ever talk about me?" he asked. Ellie's straw paused between her lips. She shook her head slowly. "Never," she said. She just... Ellie searched for the right words, brow furrowing. "She holds the diary. She looks at your picture. She makes this sound." "What sound?" Logan asked, barely breathing. Ellie's nose scrunched. Her voice dropped into a whisper imitation, thin and heartbreaking, like she's trying not to cry, but it still comes out. Logan's eyes burned again. He pressed his tongue to the roof of his mouth until it hurt. "And the picture," Ellie continued, "has your name on the back." Logan's fingers curled around the edge of the table. The plastic bit into his skin. He looked at Ellie's face, the green eyes fixed on him, and he felt the world tilt on an axis he couldn't control. Ellie tilted her head. "Why do you make my mom cry?" she asked again, softer now. "Did you leave her?" Logan opened his mouth, then closed it. His brain threw up corporate language, complicated, history, circumstances, words that meant nothing to a 5-year-old. "It's grown-up stuff," he said finally, hating himself as soon as he said it. Ellie's mouth pulled into a small frown. "Mommy says that too when she doesn't want to answer." A laugh almost escaped him, sharp and broken. It would have sounded like a sob if he let it out. He lowered his eyes, staring at Ellie's hands wrapped around the juice cup, sticky with condensation. He forced himself back into action. "Where do you live?" he asked. Ellie gave an address in halting child fragments, the street name, the building color, the number she was proud to remember. Logan repeated it, committing it to memory like a code. "And you said your mom is at the Bluebird Diner," he said. More to himself than to her. Ellie nodded. "She works a lot." Logan felt something hard settle in his chest beneath the panic. A decision forming, quiet and heavy. He glanced at his phone under the table. Notifications stacked across the screen like an avalanche. He didn't open them. He opened Maps instead and typed 2 words, Bluebird Diner. A pin dropped a few blocks away. Ellie drained the last of her juice and set the cup down with a small, satisfied thump. She swung her legs and smiled at him, missing tooth bright. "You're nice," she said simply. "I don't know why my mom cries." Logan stared at her, words trapped behind a wall of emotion he didn't have time to break down. Outside the window, The city kept moving, indifferent. Inside the booth, a 5-year-old girl waited for an answer he couldn't give, and Logan Carter realized his day had already been rewritten. He paid quickly, hands slightly unsteady, as he signed the receipt. Ellie slid out of the booth and grabbed her backpack. "I have to go," she announced, already turning toward the door. Alarm spiked through him. "Ellie, wait. I'll take you." She shook her head, hair bouncing. The sentence cut clean. Grace had built a wall, and Ellie already knew where the cracks were. Before Logan could stand, Ellie pushed the door open and slipped out into the wet light. The bell chimed once, bright and final. Logan lunged to the window. He watched Ellie step off the curb with careful confidence, red coat flashing between adults. She blended into the crowd on the opposite sidewalk like she belonged to the city more than any child should. Then, she was gone. Logan remained frozen, staring at the space where she had been, his reflection trembling in the glass. His phone buzzed again. He didn't move to answer. He looked down at the map pin glowing on his screen. Bluebird Diner. His throat tightened as if the name itself had hands. The meeting upstairs could burn. The day's appointments could collapse. He stood in the diner's harsh light, with coffee cooling in his veins and the taste of strawberry sweetness lingering in the air, and he walked out, with one destination locked in his mind. Logan drove with both hands on the wheel, knuckles pale against the leather. The city slid past in blurred slabs of concrete and glass. His phone sat face down in the cup holder, still buzzing like a trapped pulse, but he didn't touch it. The wipers kept time with his breathing left, right, left, pushing away a thin film of rain that refused to stop. At a red light, he caught his own face in the rearview mirror. The tie was still perfect. The eyes were not. They looked older than they had an hour ago, as if 5 years had stacked themselves back onto his shoulders all at once. The map voice chimed softly. "In 300 feet, turn right." Logan turned. The street changed. Less steel and height, more brick, more small storefronts with hand-painted signs. People moved slower here. A dog shook rain off its coat, droplets scattering like sparks. The air smelled like wet leaves and fryer oil. He saw it before he expected to. Bluebird Diner. A simple awning with a small Bluebird logo. Windows fogged at the edges from warmth inside. Not run down, not glamorous, just alive. Logan parked across the street and sat still for a moment, watching the movement through the glass. Laptop screens, couples leaning close, a woman laughing into her coffee, a tired man stirring sugar like it was work. No sign of Grace. His chest tightened anyway. He stepped out into the damp air and crossed, shoes splashing through shallow puddles. When he pushed the door open, a bell chimed overhead, bright and ordinary, like this place had never held a secret in its life. Warmth hit him, the smell of coffee, bread, cinnamon, a low hum of voices, the clink of spoons against ceramic. Somewhere in the back, a milk frother screamed briefly, then died. A young waitress looked up from behind the counter. She wore a blue apron and had a pen tucked behind one ear. "Morning," she said with a practiced smile. "Table for one?" Logan hesitated. His throat felt tight, the words heavier than they should have been. "Actually," he said, keeping his voice low, "I'm looking for Grace Bennett. Does she work here?" The waitress's smile shifted into something more cautious. Recognition, maybe, or a quick calculation of what kind of trouble he could be. "Grace is the manager," she said. "She's in the back office. Do you want me to call her?" Logan's fingers twitched at his side. He forced himself to nod once. "Please." The waitress glanced toward a door near the back, then back at him. "Have a seat. I'll let her know." Logan chose a booth in the corner, where he could see both the front entrance and the office door. The vinyl seat squeaked under his weight. The table was clean but worn at the edges, the kind of wear that came from thousands of elbows, thousands of small lives passing through. His phone vibrated again. He slid it out just enough to see Patrick's name flashing, then pushed it back into his pocket. He couldn't afford the sound of that voice right now. The bell over the door chimed as a family entered, shaking off umbrellas. A little boy laughed too loudly. Logan flinched anyway. He stared at the office door, willing it to stay shut and open at the same time. When it finally opened, Grace stepped out with a notepad in her hand, eyes scanning the room as if she was already solving a problem. Her hair was pinned into a simple bun, loose strands escaping near her cheekbones. She wore a pale blue shirt, with the diner's logo stitched over the pocket. No jewelry, no makeup beyond whatever life had left on her face. She looked tired, and still, in a way that made his ribs ache. She looked like home. She took 2 steps forward before her eyes landed on him. For a fraction of a second, her expression cracked. Surprise, yes, then fear. Sharp and immediate, as if she'd seen a car swerve toward her on an empty road. Then the crack sealed. A neutral mask slid into place with practiced speed. "Logan," she said. Not a question. A statement. Like naming a storm. He stood too quickly, the booth seat protesting. "Hi, Grace." They stared at each other across the small distance. The noise of the diner kept going around them like water around stones. Logan noticed tiny lines at the corner of her eyes that hadn't been there before. He noticed how her shoulders held tension even at rest. "May I sit?" he asked. Grace's fingers tightened around the notepad. She nodded once and slid into the booth opposite him. Her hands stayed clasped on the table, knuckles pale, like she didn't trust them not to shake. "How did you find me?" she asked, voice controlled, professional, as if he were a customer with a complaint. Logan's chest tightened. He considered lying. It would be easy. It would buy him a few seconds of comfort. He chose the truth. "Ellie found me yesterday." Grace's mask shattered completely. Her eyes widened. Color drained from her face in a rush. She leaned forward, voice dropping low but vibrating with panic. "What?" she whispered. "How?" "She showed up outside my building," Logan said. The words felt unreal coming out of his mouth. "She said—" He stopped. The sentence tasted like blood. Grace's jaw tightened. "Where is she?" Logan held her gaze. "She's fine. We talked. I bought her a juice. Then she left." Grace's breath caught. Her fingers dug into her own wrist so hard the skin blanched. "She left?" she repeated, as if the word didn't make sense. "Alone?" "Yes," Logan said, hating himself for it. "I tried to stop her. She wouldn't let me." Grace closed her eyes for a beat, and when she opened them again, they were glassy with anger and fear. She looked like she was holding her entire body together by force. "She told me she was going to Lily's," Grace muttered, more to herself than to him. "She promised." Logan watched her, the way her mouth pressed into a thin line, the way her shoulders lifted with a breath that didn't fully land. It hit him then, not as a thought but as a physical weight. Grace had been doing this alone, not just raising a child, raising fear, raising responsibility, raising a life without a safety net. Silence stretched between them. Logan forced himself to say the part that mattered, the part he'd driven here for. "She said you cry," he said quietly, looking at a photo of me. Grace's face tightened as if he'd slapped her. Her eyes flicked toward the counter, toward the waitress, toward the customers. She didn't want an audience. She didn't want a scene. She didn't want to give him that much power. Her voice, when it came, was cold enough to frost the table. "What do you want, Logan?" The question landed heavy. It wasn't curiosity. It was a boundary drawn in steel. Logan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The truth." Grace's eyes narrowed slightly. "The truth? About what?" Logan felt his heartbeat in his throat. He could smell the coffee on the table between them. He could hear the faint hiss of a grill in the kitchen. He could hear his own blood, loud and stupid. He said it anyway. "Is Ellie my daughter?" Grace's gaze snapped to his like a blade finding a throat. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Her jaw worked once, the muscle jumping near her cheek. Then her eyes slid away, landing on the window, on the street beyond, on anything that wasn't him. "Why does that matter now?" she asked, voice tight. "You have your life. I have mine." Logan's hands clenched under the table. He kept his voice steady through sheer force. "It matters because she's a child who walked across the city alone to find me," he said. "Because she has your eyes and—" He stopped himself before he said the rest. Before he said mine. Grace finally looked back at him, and there was pain under the anger, old and sharp. "You have no right," she said, each word precise. "You lost any right when you made decisions about our future without me, when you treated what we had like something disposable." The words hit exactly where they were meant to. Logan flinched, not outwardly, but his chest tightened as if a hand had closed around his ribs. "I made a mistake," he said. Grace's lips pressed together. "A mistake doesn't last 5 years, Logan," he swallowed. "And in 5 years, you never tried to tell me," he said, the desperation slipping through despite his control. "Not once." Grace's eyes flashed. "You don't get to turn this around on me." The diner noise swelled. A plate clattered somewhere. A child laughed. Life kept going. Grace stood abruptly, the booth seat squeaking. "I have to get back to work," she said, voice clipped. "And you probably have a company to run." Logan stood too, frustration rising hot in his throat. He kept his hands visible, kept his posture careful, like sudden movements might break whatever fragile calm remained. "This isn't over," he said. Grace's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, something like fear again, something like exhaustion. Then the waitress approached, face apologetic. "Grace," she said softly, "the coffee supplier's on the phone." Grace exhaled as if the interruption saved her from drowning. "I'll take it," she said, then looked at Logan with a final, hard glance. "Goodbye, Logan." She turned toward the back office. Logan stayed standing for a moment, watching the doors swing shut behind her. He felt hollow, like he'd stepped into the past and found it still sharp enough to cut. He slid a generous tip onto the table, then his business card beside it. His handwriting looked too firm for the way his hands had been shaking. As he walked toward the counter, he saw a small display of handmade chocolates, bright wrappers, child-sized joy. He picked one without thinking and asked the waitress for a slip of paper. In careful, neat letters, he wrote, "For the girl with the lovely smile. From your friend." He handed the chocolate and note over, keeping his voice low. "Please give this to Ellie Bennett," he said. "Grace's daughter." The waitress's expression softened. "I know Ellie," she said quietly. "She comes here after school. I'll give it to her." Logan nodded once, throat tight, and stepped back out into the damp air. The doorbell chimed behind him, cheerful and indifferent. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, rain misting his face, and looked at the street like it might offer him a way out. It didn't. He turned his collar up and walked away with one certainty lodged under all the questions. Grace hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no. Grace stood in the back office with the supplier's voice droning through the receiver, but she heard almost none of it. The words blurred into a steady, meaningless stream, while her pulse hammered beneath her collarbone. On the wall, a corkboard held receipts, pinned in tidy rows. Dates, numbers, inventory lists, proof that life could be controlled if you kept everything in order. Her fingers pressed hard against the edge of the counter until the skin went pale. Logan's face wouldn't leave her mind. Not the polished CEO version that had appeared on magazine covers, but the one she'd seen in the booth, tight around the eyes, jaw clenched like he was holding back something too big. And worse than that, the word that had turned the room cold. Daughter. Grace ended the call too quickly, muttered something about confirming the order by email, then set the receiver down with a careful click. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was not. She stepped out of the office and forced her expression into neutrality before she reached the dining area. The smell of coffee and butter wrapped around her like armor. She moved behind the counter, adjusted a stack of cups, wiped an already clean surface, did anything that looked like work. Lucy, the waitress, hovered near the register like she wanted to speak but didn't know how. Grace kept her eyes on the receipt book. "What is it?" she asked. Voice even. Lucy lowered her voice. "He left a card on his table," she said. "And a tip. A big one." Grace's throat tightened. "Okay. And—" Lucy hesitated. "He bought a chocolate from the display." Grace's fingers paused mid-motion. Lucy slid a small, wrapped chocolate and a folded slip of paper onto the counter, as if they were dangerous. Grace stared at them without touching. The wrapper was bright, childish, wrong against the diner's muted blues. The paper looked clean, crisp, the kind of paper handed out for orders or notes. She didn't need to open it to know his handwriting. Lucy watched her carefully. "He asked me to give it to Ellie," she said quietly. "He said, 'Don't.'" Grace cut in, too sharp. She swallowed and softened her tone. Lucy nodded, relief passing over her face. She backed away toward the tables. Grace kept the chocolate and the note under the counter, hidden behind the napkin stack like it could burn through everything if Ellie saw it too soon. The rest of the shift moved like thick syrup. Orders, refills, the register drawer sliding open and shut with its hollow clack. Every time the bell over the front door chimed, Grace's spine tightened, expecting him to walk in again. He didn't. That should have been relief. It wasn't. By late afternoon, Ellie would usually tumble in with her backpack bouncing, cheeks flushed from school, hair already coming loose from whatever clip Grace tried to tame it with. Grace glanced at the clock too often, each look a small betrayal of her own control. When the bell finally chimed and Ellie appeared in the doorway, Grace's lungs loosened for half a second. Ellie darted toward the counter, skidding a little on the tile. "Mom," she called, voice bright enough to cut through the diner's hum. Grace forced a smile. "Hey, honey." Ellie set her backpack down and leaned over the counter like she had secrets. Her green eyes lit up with excitement that made Grace's stomach sink. "Lucy gave me something," Ellie whispered. Grace's heart stumbled. "What did Lucy give you?" Ellie popped up on her toes. "A chocolate," she announced, loud enough that a man 2 stools down glanced over. She lowered her voice again immediately, delighted by the drama of it. "And a note." Grace's mouth went dry. She felt Lucy's gaze from across the room, apologetic and helpless. Ellie reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the candy like a prize. The wrapper crinkled in her small hands. Grace stared at it, recognizing it instantly. Ellie peeled it halfway open, then paused to fish the folded paper out too. "It's from my friend," she said proudly. Grace's skin went cold. "Your friend?" she repeated. "Careful." Ellie nodded hard. Grace's smile froze at the edges. Ellie unfolded the paper with clumsy fingers, concentrating so hard her brow creased. She couldn't fully read yet, not without help, But she knew letters, and she knew names. She held it up anyway like it proved something. It says, Ellie squinted, for the girl with the lovely smile. She looked up, triumphant. That's me, Grace swallowed. Who gave you that, Ellie? Ellie grinned, like the answer was obvious. Logan. The name landed in the diner like a dropped tray. Not loud, but sharp enough that Grace felt every nerve in her body jump. Ellie's voice raced ahead, unaware of the damage. He left it yesterday. Lucy said he came to see you, and he bought me a huge milkshake before too. Grace felt her chest tighten. Ellie, she said, low and firm, you cannot go to his building by yourself again. Ellie blinked, confused by the sudden seriousness. But I wanted to meet him. That's not the point. Grace kept her voice controlled, but her fingers curled around the counter edge. It's dangerous. Ellie's mouth pulled into a stubborn line that looked painfully familiar. I know the way. Grace closed her eyes for a beat. In her head, she saw Ellie stepping off a curb, red coat flashing between strangers. Saw a car that didn't stop. Saw a door that didn't open. Fear rose so fast it made her dizzy. Lucy approached carefully, hands wringing her apron. Grace, she said softly, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. It's fine. Grace cut in, too quickly. She forced a breath, tried to regain her grip. It's fine. Ellie tapped the note with one finger, impatient. I want to see him again, she said, voice bright, almost pleading. He's nice. He told me a story about a dog that ate socks. Grace's throat tightened. A ridiculous detail. And still, it made her picture Logan's mouth twisting into a smile, the way it used to when he was trying to make her laugh after a fight. She pushed the thought away like it was poison. Ellie, she said, softer now, you barely know him. Ellie's eyes widened in pure child logic. But you know him. Grace's breath caught. Ellie leaned closer. You have his picture in your diary. Heat rushed into Grace's face. She glanced around, suddenly aware of Lucy's curiosity, of the open space, of how exposed everything felt. We'll talk about it later, Grace said quickly. Go sit and eat your sandwich. Ellie didn't move. Just a little bit, she begged. Please, I want to see him one more time. Grace stared at her daughter. The stubborn chin, the fearless eyes, the way Ellie would keep pushing until she got an answer, or until she decided to get it herself. And that was the problem. If Grace shut this down completely, Ellie would not forget. She would not let it go. She would find another way. A bus again. A walk. A lie about Lily's house. Grace's stomach twisted. That night, after closing, after Ellie's bath, after bedtime stories, and the slow drift of her daughter's breathing, Grace sat alone at the small kitchen table in their apartment. The light above the sink flickered faintly, a tired buzz. The neighborhood outside was quiet except for distant sirens and the occasional car washing past on wet pavement. On the table in front of her lay Logan's business card. She hadn't thrown it away. She'd told herself it was for practical reasons, if Ellie got sick, if there was an emergency, if she needed answers. But the truth sat in the room with her, heavy and undeniable. She turned the card over with 2 fingers. His number stared back at her in familiar handwriting. Ink pressed hard into the paper, as if he'd been angry when he wrote it. Or afraid. Grace's thumb hovered over her phone screen. Her stomach churned with old resentment, old pain, old pride. 5 years of building a life with no room for him. Then she heard Ellie's voice in her head, small and stubborn. I want to see him again. Grace closed her eyes and inhaled slowly, tasting the faint soap scent still clinging to the air from Ellie's bath. She opened her messaging app. Her fingers moved before her courage could collapse. Ellie wants to see you again. Saturday, 3 p.m., Riverside Park. 1 hour. No more. She stared at the message for a long beat, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Then she hit send. The reply came almost instantly, the screen lighting her face in the dark. I'll be there. Thank you, Grace. Grace's chest tightened. Not with relief, not with happiness, with the terrifying awareness that once you opened a door like this, it never closed the same way again. Saturday arrived with a pale sun and wind that smelled like damp grass. Grace checked her watch so many times, the strap left a faint mark on her wrist. The park was already busy, families drifting between playground equipment and food carts, toddlers wobbling on the rubberized ground, older kids shrieking as they launched themselves off swings. The noise should have been soothing. Instead, it made her feel exposed. Ellie bounced at her side, red coat buttoned wrong in her excitement, Mr. Fluff tucked under one arm like a passport. She kept craning her neck toward the path, eyes bright, searching. Remember, Grace said, keeping her voice calm. 1 hour. I know, Ellie said, already half running toward the slide. 1 hour, like a magic timer. Grace sat on a bench close enough to see the entire playground. The metal was cold through her jeans. A gust stirred dead leaves into a thin spiral near her feet. She watched Ellie climb the steps, small hands gripping the rails with practiced confidence, then disappear into the tunnel slide and shoot out the other side laughing. Grace tried to breathe like this was normal, like she hadn't invited the past into a public place and told it to behave. At 10 minutes to 3, she saw him. Logan walked along the stone path in jeans and a simple blue shirt. No tie, no polished shoes. His hair was slightly wind-tossed, as if he'd driven here with the windows down to stay awake. He scanned the park with a tense focus that looked almost unfamiliar on his face. When his eyes found Ellie, his expression softened so quickly it made Grace's throat tighten. Ellie spotted him a heartbeat later. "Logan!" she shouted, voice carrying across the playground. Before Grace could call her back for instructions, Ellie launched off the platform and sprinted across the rubber ground. Mr. Fluff swinging wildly, Logan crouched automatically, arms opening before Ellie even reached him. She collided into his chest like she belonged there. Logan laughed, an actual laugh, startled and real, then steadied her by the shoulders. He stayed low, meeting her eye level the way he had the first day she found him. Like he'd learned that this was how you spoke to her world. Grace's chest constricted at the sight. She forced her hands to unclench on her lap. Ellie talked immediately, words pouring out in a stream. Logan nodded, asked short questions, smiled at her answers as if each one mattered. He touched Mr. Fluff's ear with 2 fingers, like he'd been formally introduced to an important friend. Grace watched from a distance, letting them have space but keeping her eyes sharp. Logan didn't glance around for recognition, didn't pull out his phone, didn't perform. He looked only at Ellie. After a few minutes, Logan lifted his gaze, finding Grace on the bench. He didn't come closer. He didn't force her into a conversation she wasn't ready for. He simply raised his eyebrows in a silent question, then pointed gently beyond the playground toward a nearby corner street, the kind lined with small shops. Grace hesitated, then nodded once. Logan took Ellie's hand and walked her away from the playground. Ellie skipped beside him, hair bouncing, feet barely touching the ground in her excitement. Grace followed at a measured distance, keeping them in sight, like she'd promised herself she would. They reached a storefront with painted windows and a sign that read, "Enchanted Pages." Inside, warm light spilled onto the sidewalk, golden and inviting. Logan opened the door for Ellie and guided her in with a gentle hand at her back, never pulling, never rushing. Grace paused outside the window. The bookstore was a child's dream. Low shelves filled with bright covers, beanbags in primary colors, a mural of forest animals climbing a painted tree along one wall. Ellie darted toward the animal section immediately, tugging Logan by the hand with urgent insistence. Logan followed, smiling, letting Ellie lead like she was the expert, and he was lucky to be invited. They sank onto a pair of yellow beanbags near the window. Ellie climbed onto Logan's lap without asking, small body settling against him, as if she'd been doing it for years, not days. Logan's hands hovered for half a second, uncertain. Careful then, one arm wrapped around her lightly, protective without claiming too much. Grace's stomach flipped. Logan opened a picture book Ellie had grabbed. He pointed to illustrations, moving his lips as he read, his face shifting into different expressions for different characters. Ellie's head tilted, eyes wide, tracking every page. When Logan made a silly face, Ellie burst into laughter, a bright sound that punched straight through Grace's defenses. Grace's hand lifted to her mouth before she realized it. Her eyes stung, but she kept her gaze fixed on the window, refusing to look away first. When they left the bookstore, Logan didn't turn toward anything expensive. He didn't parade Ellie into a fancy restaurant or a toy store that glittered with price tags. Instead, he took her next door to a small candy shop with pastel walls and a glass case full of simple sweets. Grace watched from outside again, her breath fogging the corner of the window. Ellie stood on tiptoe, pointing at cupcakes. Logan leaned down and listened with exaggerated seriousness, as if choosing frosting was a boardroom decision. Ellie picked a chocolate cupcake with sprinkles. Logan paid. Then they sat at a tiny table near the window. Ellie talked with her mouth half full, cheeks puffed adorably. A smear of chocolate appeared at the corner of her mouth. Logan reached for a napkin without thinking and wiped it away with a gentle swipe, careful not to press too hard. The gesture was so natural, Grace had to turn her head slightly, blinking fast. Her throat tightened with a familiar ache. This was what Ellie should have had. Someone present for the tiny, ordinary things. Ellie said something that made Logan recoil theatrically, like he'd been insulted. He widened his eyes, clutched his chest, then pretended to faint against the back of the chair. Ellie shrieked with laughter, nearly sliding off her seat. People around them smiled. A woman at the next table glanced over with soft approval. Grace felt her lips twitch into a reluctant smile. Almost an hour passed without Grace realizing it. The moment she checked her watch, her stomach jolted. Time. She straightened, ready to step in. Before she could, Logan and Ellie emerged from the candy shop. Logan held a small paper bag. Ellie clutched a book tight against her chest, as if it might vanish if she loosened her grip. They walked back toward the park. Grace moved quickly to sit on her bench again, smoothing her hair as if she hadn't been there the entire time, watching through glass like a witness. Logan knelt in front of Ellie near the bench. He said something softly. Ellie nodded with sudden seriousness, lips pressed together like she was making a promise. Then Ellie threw her arms around him. It was fast, fierce, and completely unguarded. Her small arms barely reached around his neck. Logan froze for a heartbeat, eyes wide, as if his body didn't know whether it was allowed to accept. Then his arms wrapped around her carefully, and Grace saw his face change. Joy, yes, but also pain so deep it hollowed his expression. His eyes closed, his jaw tightened. He held Ellie like she was the one real thing in a world that kept slipping away. Grace's chest tightened until she could barely breathe. Ellie pulled back and ran to Grace, waving the book. "Mommy, look! Logan got me the rabbit book," she announced, proud. "And we had cupcakes. And he told me about a dog named Max who ate shoes." Grace forced her voice to stay light. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Ellie bounced in place, excited. He said we can read it together next time. Grace lifted her gaze. Logan stood a few steps away, hands in his pockets, giving her space the way she'd demanded, without ever saying it out loud. His eyes were cautious, like he expected her to slam the door again at any moment. Grace's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. Gratitude felt dangerous. Anger felt tired. Ellie tugged her sleeve. "Can we see him again?" she whispered, as if it was a secret request to the universe. Grace looked down at her daughter's face, green eyes shining, cheeks flushed, happiness real and simple. Then she looked at Logan, standing there like a man waiting for judgment. "Go say goodbye," Grace heard herself say, voice softer than she intended. "It's time for us to leave." Ellie sprinted back to Logan, chattering. Logan crouched again, listening, nodding. Ellie waved goodbye with both arms, Mr. Fluff tucked under one elbow, book clutched in the other hand. Logan lifted his gaze to Grace and gave a small wave from where he stood. He didn't approach. He didn't push. He simply waited, respectful. Grace lifted her hand and waved back, minimal but real. On the walk to the bus stop, Ellie talked non-stop about beanbags, rabbits, cupcakes, and how Logan's pretend fainting was the funniest thing in history. Grace listened, the book's weight noticeable in Ellie's hands like proof. A minute before the bus arrived, Ellie looked up suddenly. "Mommy," she said, voice small. "You smiled today." Grace's chest tightened. She turned her face away slightly, pretending to adjust Ellie's scarf against the wind. "It was just a nice day." Ellie leaned closer, satisfied. "We should have more nice days." The bus hissed to a stop, doors folding open with a mechanical sigh. Grace helped Ellie climb aboard, then stepped in behind her, the smell of wet coats and warm air wrapping around them. Ellie settled into a seat by the window and pressed her forehead to the glass, watching the park slide away. Grace sat beside her, hands folded in her lap, heart unsteady. She had wanted this hour to be controlled, contained, a simple experiment with a clear end. Instead, it felt like the first crack in a dam. Ellie hugged the rabbit book tighter and whispered to the window, as if speaking to the city itself. Next time, the Saturday meetings became their quiet routine, the way habits always did. First, awkward and deliberate, then strangely normal. Grace still checked her watch too often, still chose benches with clear sightlines, still kept her voice polite and her distance firm. But Ellie counted the days like small treasures, circling them in her mind long before they arrived. On the third Saturday, the air had turned crisp enough to sting. Leaves gathered along the park path in damp piles, and the lake beyond the trees held the sky like a dark mirror. Logan arrived carrying a small paper bag folded at the top. Grace's eyes went straight to it. "What's that?" she asked, before she could stop herself. Logan smiled, careful, almost sheepish. "Stale bread," he said. "I thought, if it's okay with you, I'd take Ellie to the lake to feed the ducks." Grace hesitated. The lake was farther than the bookstore, farther than the candy shop. Still public, still crowded on weekends, but different, less controlled, more open. Ellie bounced between them, already vibrating with excitement. "Please, Mommy," she begged, clutching Mr. Fluff under one arm. "I've never fed ducks before." Grace looked at her daughter's face and felt the familiar surrender settle into her bones. "1 hour," she said, firm. "And you stay where I can see you when you're not with him." Logan's shoulders loosened slightly, like he'd been holding his breath. "I promise," he said. Then, softer, he added, "You can come with us if you want." The invitation landed gently, but it still felt like pressure. Grace's first instinct was to refuse, to protect the line she'd drawn between them. "I'll pass," she said quickly. Something flickered in Logan's eyes. Disappointment. Maybe then it disappeared. He didn't argue. He simply turned to Ellie and crouched. "Ready, Miss Ellie?" he asked. "The ducks are waiting." Ellie slipped her hand into his with the ease of a child who didn't understand how precious that gesture was. Grace followed them at a distance along the path, keeping her pace steady, refusing to let her thoughts run faster than her feet. The lake opened up through the trees, wide and calm, a sheet of blue-green under the pale sun. Families gathered along the edge. Kids threw crumbs and squealed when ducks paddled close. The air smelled like water and earth and something fried from a nearby cart. Logan chose a bench near the water, but not too isolated, close enough to other people to feel safe, far enough to give Ellie space. He sat and opened the paper bag, tearing off small pieces with deliberate care. "We have to be gentle," he told her. "Small pieces. No throwing at them. And we share, okay? So all the ducks get some." Ellie nodded solemnly, taking each rule like it was sacred. Logan demonstrated first. He tossed a small piece into the water. It landed with a soft plop. Within seconds, 2 ducks glided over, bodies slicing the surface in smooth lines. Ellie gasped, hand flying to her mouth. "They're coming," she whispered. "Now you," Logan said, handing her a piece. Ellie tossed it, a little too close to shore, and a smaller duck darted forward and snapped it up. Ellie clapped her hands. "I did it," Logan smiled, warm and genuine. "You did. Great throw." Grace watched from her chosen distance, arms folded to keep herself from trembling in the cold. She told herself she was watching for safety, for boundaries, for any sign that Logan would push too far. Instead, she kept catching smaller things. How he waited for Ellie's permission before guiding her hand. How he laughed when she got excited, not at her, with her. How he stayed alert, scanning the water, the people, the edges of the path like a man who understood that children disappeared in seconds if you stopped paying attention. Ellie fed the ducks with slow, careful joy. Between tosses, she talked about Miss Kelly, about Diego's dinosaur drawings, about how she wanted purple shoes because purple was the happiest color. Logan listened like her words mattered more than his phone ever had. After a while, Ellie tore off another piece of bread and looked up at Logan. "You know what?" she said. Logan's smile softened. "What?" "I really like spending time with you." The sentence was simple, innocent, and it hit with the weight of something permanent. Logan's throat moved as he swallowed. He blinked once, too slow. "I really like spending time with you too," he managed, voice rougher than before. Ellie nodded, as if she'd confirmed something important. She tossed another piece of bread. A duck snapped it up. "Mommy gets sad sometimes," Ellie said, casual, like she was talking about weather. "But she smiles more on the days we meet." Logan's gaze flicked toward Grace, instinctive, even though she stood farther down the path. Grace's chest tightened as if he'd touched a bruise. "Really?" Logan asked quietly. Ellie nodded. Not a big smile. A real one. Logan's jaw tightened. He looked back at the lake, at the ducks cutting through the water, like he needed something to focus on that wouldn't break him. Ellie continued, voice softer. "Sometimes I hear her crying at night, when she thinks I'm asleep." Logan's fingers curled around the paper bag. The thin paper crinkled loudly in the quiet. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. He just stayed there, present, letting Ellie speak at her own pace. Ellie ripped another piece of bread, slower now. "Diego has a dad," she said. "He plays with him every day. And Lily's dad lives in another house, but he still picks her up on weekends. Logan took a long breath that made his shoulders rise. He looked at Ellie's small hands, the way they pinched the bread carefully, the concentration on her face. "Ellie," he said gently, "sometimes grown-ups make choices, and sometimes those choices hurt people. But I want you to know I'm really glad I get to be here with you now." Ellie tilted her head. "You knew my mom before," she said, fitting the pieces together the way children did with brutal clarity. "That's why she had your picture." Logan nodded once. "Yes, I knew your mom a long time ago." "Why did you stop being friends?" Ellie asked. Logan's mouth opened and closed like the words weren't shaped for this kind of honesty. His eyes drifted past Ellie, past the lake, toward nothing. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "And she decided it was better not to be friends anymore." Ellie frowned, thinking hard. "But if you said sorry, she should forgive you. Miss Kelly says we have to forgive people when they're really sorry." Logan let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. But it didn't hold joy. "It's not always that simple," he said. "But I'm trying to do things right." Ellie glanced down at the bright watch on her wrist, the kind designed to teach kids time. "We have to go back," she announced. "Mom will be worried." Logan nodded. "You're right. When do? When 19 mine duja." He folded the paper bag, stood, and held out his hand. Ellie took it without hesitation. They walked back along the path, Ellie chattering again about baby ducks and how she wanted to be a duck doctor when she grew up. Grace watched them approach, her heart beating too fast for someone simply standing in a park. Ellie broke into a run the last few steps. "Mommy," she called, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. It was the best day with ducks ever. Grace crouched and hugged her daughter, feeling the warmth of her through the coat. "I'm glad you had fun," she said, voice steadier than she felt. Ellie clung to her for a second, then pulled back and pointed wildly toward the lake. There was a baby duck, and it was so fluffy. And Logan said, "I have the best throw in the world." Grace smiled, brushing Ellie's curls back under her hat. "That's wonderful." Logan stopped a few steps away, hands in his pockets, staying where he'd learned she was comfortable. The cold wind lifted his shirt slightly against his waist. His eyes met Grace's, cautious and searching. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ellie tugged Grace's sleeve. "Can we do it again sometime? Please?" Grace looked at her daughter's eager face. Then she looked at Logan, the man who had not once pushed past her boundaries, who had shown up in simple clothes, who had spent 40 minutes tearing bread into tiny pieces like it mattered. Grace's resentment didn't vanish. It didn't turn into forgiveness, but it shifted, just slightly, like ice beginning to thin under sun. She stood and smoothed Ellie's coat. "Say thank you," she told her. Ellie ran to Logan and hugged him around the waist. Logan laughed softly and ruffled her hair, careful not to mess it too much. "Thank you for coming with me, Miss Ellie," he said. "It was the best day with ducks for me too." Ellie stepped back, satisfied, and returned to Grace's side. Logan's gaze stayed on Grace. "Until next Saturday?" he asked quietly, like he didn't want to scare the answer away. Grace hesitated, feeling the old wound under the question. Then she nodded once. "Until Saturday," she said. As they walked away, Ellie between them, Grace felt something inside her shift again. Not trust, not love, but the first faint outline of a future where those things could exist without destroying her. Logan's office smelled like fresh paper and cold glass. The walls were too clean, the kind of clean that made every sound sharper. A muted hum rose from the building's ventilation system, steady as a pulse. His reflection hovered in the window behind his desk. The skyline fractured across the glass. He straightened his tie for the third time, then stopped, annoyed at himself. The knot was perfect. The problem wasn't his tie. A board meeting waited 5 minutes down the hall. Investors would ask about forecasts, margins, expansion plans. He could answer those in his sleep, but his mind kept returning to a small hand tossing bread into water, and a voice saying, "Mommy smiles more on the days we meet." His phone vibrated against the desk, the screen lighting up with Patrick's name. Logan let it ring out. Then, another vibration, Kate, reminding him of the meeting. Logan stared at the notification until it blurred, then stood. When he walked into the conference room, the air felt colder. A long table stretched beneath recessed lights. Laptops were open, coffee cups steaming, pens tapping. Logan took his seat at the head and began, calm and efficient, the words leaving him like rehearsed lines. Revenue projections, risk mitigation, a new product roadmap. He nodded, smiled, asked questions, fielded theirs. He watched their mouths move and heard only fragments, because behind every sentence ran the same thought, like a second soundtrack. What if he didn't have the right? What if Grace could shut the door tomorrow, and he would have no legal, moral, or practical way to keep it open? And the other thought, sharper, crueler. What if he did have the right, and he kept wasting time out of fear? The meeting ended with polite handshakes and the dull scrape of chairs. Logan returned to his office and closed the door. The click of the latch sounded final, like a decision being sealed. He stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet. His heartbeat felt loud in the empty space. He turned to the window and watched cars move far below like insects. 5 years ago, he would have called this view proof of winning. Now it looked like distance. He sat and pulled his phone closer. Grace's number sat in his contacts like a live wire. He hadn't saved it with a nickname, just her name, Grace Bennett. Plain and unforgiving. He stared until his eyes stung. Then he tapped call. The ring sounded too loud, too intimate. He pictured her at the diner counter, wiping a surface that didn't need wiping. Her jaw tight, her eyes scanning for problems. She answered on the second ring. "Hello?" Her voice was controlled, but there was caution beneath it, like she expected impact. "Grace," Logan said. He hated how small his own voice sounded. "It's me." A beat of silence. In the background, he heard a faint clatter cups. Maybe, or a register drawer. "I know," Grace said. "What is it?" Logan swallowed. "Can we talk in person?" Grace exhaled slowly. "Now." "No," Logan said quickly. "I know Ellie's home. I'm not asking you to leave her. Tomorrow, after you close. Just you." Her silence stretched long enough to make his palms damp. He imagined her eyes narrowing, her mind weighing risk. "Tomorrow," she said finally. "We close at 9. 9:30. "I'll be there," Logan said. Relief loosened something in his chest and made him dizzy. "Thank you." Grace's voice hardened slightly. "This isn't about you feeling better, Logan." "I know," he said. "It's about the truth." She didn't respond to that. The line went dead with a soft click. Logan sat staring at his phone for a moment, feeling like he'd just stepped onto a bridge he couldn't see the end of. Across the city, in a small apartment that smelled like laundry detergent and children's shampoo, Grace stood at her kitchen table with Ellie's colorful shirts folded into neat stacks beside her. The clock ticked on the wall, loud in the quiet. Ellie slept in the next room, her breathing steady, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Grace folded another shirt, smoothing the fabric with both hands, as if she could flatten her own thoughts. In the living room, taped to the wall near the bookshelf, Ellie's drawings formed a crooked gallery, stick figure animals, messy rainbows, a house with smoke coming out of a chimney that looked like a squiggle. Grace's eyes snagged on one drawing she'd been avoiding all week. She set the shirt down and reached for it slowly. 3 stick figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun. One small figure with curly hair, one taller figure with long hair, one taller figure with short hair. In thick, uneven letters, the caption read, "My family." Underneath, in smaller writing that looked like a teacher's help, a name was added beside each figure. Me, Mommy, Logan. Grace's throat tightened so fast she couldn't inhale properly. Her fingers trembled against the paper's edge. Ellie had drawn it without being told anything, without being coached. Her child's mind had made its own truth and put it on the wall where Grace had to see it every day. Grace sat down hard on the couch. The springs creaked. She stared at the drawing like it was evidence in a trial. 5 years ago, she had walked away because she couldn't bear being treated like an afterthought. She remembered the contract folder on their kitchen table, the way Logan spoke about it like it was a done deal, like her opinion was an inconvenience. She remembered the taste of metal in her mouth when she realized he'd chosen alone. When she found out she was pregnant 3 weeks later, she had stood in a pharmacy bathroom with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, staring at the test as if it belonged to someone else. Her hand had shaken as she dialed his number and then hung up before it could ring. She could still feel that moment. The fear wrapped around her ribs. Not fear of him hurting her again, fear of him doing to a child what he'd done to her, making life-altering decisions without regard, letting ambition swallow everything that wasn't a deal. Grace pressed her knuckles into her mouth, holding the sound inside her throat. She had built their life carefully. 2 people, predictable routines, safe boundaries. A world where Ellie didn't have to wait by a window for someone who never came. And then Ellie had walked straight through those boundaries like they were chalk. Grace's phone lit up on the coffee table. Logan's name. Her stomach dropped. The call ended, and a message appeared a second later. Tomorrow, 9:30. Thank you. Grace stared at the screen until it dimmed. Her reflection hovered in the black glass, tired eyes, tight mouth, hair pulled back like she'd been bracing for impact for years. From the bedroom, Ellie's small voice drifted out, sleepy and soft. "Mommy?" Grace stood quickly, wiping her face with the back of her hand before Ellie could see. She walked into the bedroom and found Ellie half awake, blinking slowly, curls spread across the pillow. "What is it, honey?" Grace asked, forcing warmth into her voice. Ellie squinted at her, as if she could read what adults tried to hide. "Are you sad?" Grace's throat tightened again. She sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed Ellie's hair. "No," she lied gently, "just tired." Ellie's hand reached out and caught Grace's fingers. Her grip was small but sure. "You smiled at the park," she murmured, eyes already closing again. "I like when you smile." Grace leaned down and kissed her forehead, the skin warm and innocent beneath her lips. "Go back to sleep," she whispered. Ellie's breathing evened out again within minutes. Grace stayed there, sitting in the dim light, listening to the soft tick of the clock and the faint rush of cars outside. Her mind kept circling the same 2 images: Logan's careful distance in the park, and Ellie's drawing on the wall. Tomorrow night, in the quiet after closing, there would be no crowds, no playground noise, no excuses, just the truth. Grace stood and walked back to the living room. She picked up Ellie's drawing and held it in both hands, the paper slightly bent from being touched too often. Her eyes moved over the names again. Me, Mommy, Logan. Grace set the drawing back on the wall carefully, straightening it until it hung level. Then she looked at the clock, at the dark window, at the life she'd built, and she waited for 9:30. The diner looked different at night. The bright daytime warmth had drained away, leaving softer lights behind the counter and shadows pooled in the corners. Chairs sat upside down on tabletops, their metal legs pointing toward the ceiling like quiet warnings. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleanser and old coffee. Logan arrived 15 minutes early and parked a block away, as if distance might steady him. When he pushed the door open, the bell chimed once, too cheerful for the hour. Grace looked up from behind the counter. Her hair was pinned in a messy bun now, strands escaping around her face. She wore the same blue shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands moving through receipts, and a calculator with tired efficiency. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them felt larger than the diner itself. "Are you open?" Logan asked, voice low, trying to make it sound like a joke. "Only for you," Grace answered, not smiling. She nodded toward the counter. "Come here." Logan stepped closer. The rubber mat beneath his shoes squeaked slightly. He stopped at the counter, hands hovering awkwardly at his sides like he didn't know where to put them. "Coffee?" Grace asked. "Please." She moved with practiced motions, filter, grounds, water, each action precise, controlled. The machine gurgled and hissed, filling the silence with something mechanical. Logan watched her hands, noticing the small dryness around her knuckles, the faint redness at the fingertips from constant washing. Grace set 2 cups down and slid one toward him. The ceramic clicked softly on the counter. Logan wrapped his hands around it, absorbing the heat like it could anchor him. "How's Ellie?" he asked. The safest question he had. Grace's face softened for a heartbeat. "Sleeping," she said quietly. "She spent the day with my parents. She came home exhausted." Logan nodded, swallowing. "Your mom told me she talks about me nonstop." Grace's mouth tightened, but she didn't deny it. She lifted her cup and took a sip, eyes lowered as if the coffee could hide her. "She's amazing," Logan said. His voice cracked slightly on the word. "You've done an incredible job." Grace's gaze rose to his, sharp again. "She's the most important thing in my life." Logan breathed in slowly, tasting coffee and fear. The hum of the refrigerator behind the counter filled the space between their sentences. "Grace," he said, steadier now, "I can't keep doing this in limbo." Her fingers tightened around her cup. "What do you want from me?" "The truth," he said. The words were simple, but they landed heavy. "Is Ellie my daughter?" Silence dropped like a curtain. The only sound was the faint tick of a wall clock behind the counter and the distant rush of a car passing outside. Grace stared into her coffee, as if it could give her an answer she didn't already know. Her knuckles whitened around the mug handle. "Why does it matter now?" she whispered, voice rougher than it had been in weeks. "You have your company, your life." Logan's jaw clenched. He felt the old reflex rise, the urge to argue, to justify, to control the narrative. He forced it down. "It matters because I'm falling in love with that little girl," he said, voice trembling despite his effort. "Every Saturday, every second. And I need to know if I have the right to feel that, if I have the right to be there." Grace's eyes lifted slowly. They glistened under the soft lights, anger and pain braided together. "And if she is?" Grace asked. "What changes?" Logan's breath caught. He set the cup down carefully, like he couldn't trust his hands. "Everything," he said, "and nothing. I'll still want to be part of her life. I'll still show up, but I'll know I'm not stealing moments from a child who doesn't belong to me." Grace flinched at the word stealing, as if it cut too close. "You would have had that right," she said, voice shaking with restrained rage. Logan's eyes tightened. "I tried." Grace's laugh was short and bitter. "Did you?" Logan leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice low. "I called you dozens of times. You never answered. I went to your parents' house. Your mom told me you didn't want to see me. After a while, his throat tightened. After a while, I believed you meant it. Grace's face wavered, the anger faltering into something more complicated. She looked away, blinking hard. I was hurt, she said quietly. You don't understand what you did. You really don't. I know, Logan said immediately, voice heavy with shame. I didn't include you. I made the choice alone. I told myself it was business, that it was necessary. But it wasn't just the contract, was it? It was what it meant. Grace's fingers trembled. She set her cup down, the ceramic clicking again. It meant I wasn't important enough, she whispered. Not enough to be part of the decision that shaped our future. Logan closed his eyes briefly, feeling the old memory like a bruise being pressed. When he opened them, his gaze was steady. I was an idiot, he said. I was terrified of failing, terrified of losing what I was building. And I didn't see I was already losing the thing that mattered most. Grace inhaled sharply, as if the words pulled something loose inside her. Logan's voice softened. Grace, did you know? Grace's jaw tightened. She stared at the counter like it could hold her up. He asked anyway. Did you know you were pregnant when you left? Grace's eyes squeezed shut. When she opened them, tears slid down her cheeks without her permission. I found out 3 weeks after, she said, voice barely audible. Logan went still. The air seemed to thin. 3 weeks, he repeated, as if the number itself was a punch. Grace nodded once, eyes on the counter, refusing to look at him. Why didn't you tell me? Logan asked. It wasn't anger in his voice. It was something worse, raw disbelief. Grace's shoulders lifted with a shaky breath. Because I was afraid, she said. Afraid you'd come back out of obligation. Afraid you'd resent her. Afraid you'd make her feel like an afterthought the way you made me feel. Logan's throat tightened so hard he could barely swallow. He stared at the counter's edge, fighting to keep himself from falling apart. I can't change what I did, he said slowly. But I can tell you this. I would never make her feel disposable. Not for a contract. Not for a company. Not for anything. Grace finally looked at him then, and the pain in her eyes nearly buckled his knees. I didn't want her to grow up waiting, she whispered. Waiting by a window. Waiting for a call that never comes. Logan's eyes burned. He lifted one hand and set it on the counter, palm up, not reaching for her but offering something he didn't know how to name. I'm asking for forgiveness, he said, voice breaking. Not so I can feel better. Not so I can pretend 5 years didn't happen. I'm asking because I don't want to keep hurting you through her. Grace stared at his open hand. Her breath hitched. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she spoke, steady, despite the tears. Ellie is your daughter, she said. The words didn't sound like comfort. They sounded like a verdict. Logan's body went rigid. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes flooded, and he didn't wipe them. He didn't care how it looked. A tear slid down his cheek and dropped onto the counter with a tiny, almost invisible tap. He gave a shaky laugh that wasn't laughter at all. She is, he whispered, like he needed to hear himself say it. Grace's lips pressed together, but her eyes softened just slightly. She always has been. Logan swallowed hard, breathing through the force of it. Why? Why let me see her now? He asked, voice rough. After all this time, Grace wiped her face with the back of her hand, angry at the tears. Because she found you, she said, and because I watched you with her. And I realized. Her voice faltered. I might have denied her something important. A father, Logan whispered. Grace didn't deny it. Her silence confirmed everything. Logan pressed his fingers to his eyes, wiping away wetness he couldn't control. When he lowered his hand, his gaze met hers. "Thank you," he said, voice shaking, "for letting me meet her." Grace's mouth twitched into a small, unwilling smile, pain still threaded through it. "She looks like you," she said quietly. "She has your stubbornness." Logan's laugh broke again, softer, almost stunned. "And your eyes," he said, "and your heart." A quiet settled between them, still heavy, but different now. Less like a wall, more like a bridge that had finally been acknowledged. Grace inhaled slowly. "She doesn't know," she said, caution returning. "I didn't tell her you're her father." Logan nodded immediately, careful. "Whenever you think the time is right," he said. "No rush. We do it together. We do it right." Grace studied him, searching for cracks. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping briefly across the diner windows like a slow blink. Finally, she nodded once small, but real. "We'll need boundaries," she said. "Rules, whatever you want," Logan answered, without hesitation. "Whatever is best for her." Grace's eyes held his for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of belief. On the wall behind the counter, Ellie's drawings hung in crooked lines. Logan's gaze snagged on one he hadn't noticed before. 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. His chest tightened again. Grace followed his gaze and looked away quickly, as if the paper itself exposed too much. Logan exhaled slowly, the sound trembling. "I won't disappear," he said, voice low. "Not again. Not from her." Grace didn't answer with words. She lifted her cup and took a small sip, eyes shining. In the quiet diner, under soft lights and the steady tick of the clock, the truth finally had a place to sit. And neither of them could pretend it wasn't there anymore. The apartment smelled like wet wool and cocoa powder. Ellie sat bundled on the couch, with Mr. Fluff tucked under her arm, cheeks pink from the run through the rain. Logan had barely set his damp shoes by the door when Ellie's energy shifted fast, laughter dimming into a quiet stillness that didn't fit her. Grace noticed first. Ellie blinked too slowly, eyes glossy, her small shoulders drawn inward, as if she was trying to disappear into the blanket. When Logan pressed the back of his fingers to her forehead, the heat was immediate, unnatural. "She's burning," he said, voice tight. Grace's jaw clenched as she reached for the thermometer, hands moving with practiced urgency. The quiet beep felt too loud in the small room. She stared at the display, then at Ellie, then back again, as if numbers could be argued with. Ellie's lips trembled. "My head hurts," she whispered. Logan's stomach dropped. He knew the fear on Grace's face, sharp, controlled, the kind that came from having no one else to pass it to. "We're going," Logan said. It wasn't a suggestion. He was already grabbing his jacket, already lifting Ellie carefully, as if she might break. Ellie's head fell against his shoulder, hotter than it should have been, her breath shallow and quick. Grace followed with a bag of essentials in one hand and her keys in the other. Eyes locked on Ellie like looking away might make something worse happen. The hospital air hit them like a wall, cold, disinfectant, faintly metallic. The pediatric triage area glowed under harsh lights that made everyone look tired and pale. Ellie's name was called quickly, after the nurse took her temperature again and glanced at Grace's tight face, then at Logan's grip on Ellie's hand. A bracelet snapped around Ellie's wrist with a soft plastic click. Another around Grace's, another around Logan's, proof of who belonged here, who was allowed beyond the doors. A doctor introduced himself, voice calm, eyes attentive. He listened to Grace's rushed answers, then examined Ellie with gentle efficiency, a stethoscope against Ellie's back, a flashlight in her eyes. a small finger pressing her throat. "We need blood work and a chest X-ray," the doctor said quietly. "I want to rule out something bacterial." Grace's hand found Logan's without thinking. Her fingers were cold. Logan squeezed back, steadying her while his own chest felt too tight to breathe. Ellie cried when the needle went in, not from pain alone but from fear, wide eyes searching Logan's face, as if he could rewrite what was happening by willpower. Logan held her close, whispering promises into her hair, keeping his voice low and even until her sobs turned into hiccuping breaths. Hours blurred into a rhythm of doors opening, wheels squeaking, monitors beeping, nurses moving with soft shoes and clipped voices. Ellie was finally settled into a small room with a narrow bed, an IV line taped to her arm, clear fluid dripping steadily like a slow metronome. Grace sat in a chair beside her, shoulders rounded forward, exhaustion creeping into her posture. Logan stood at the foot of the bed and watched Ellie sleep under medication, her lashes resting against flushed cheeks. He stared at the rise and fall of her chest like it was the only number that mattered. Just after midnight, the doctor returned with a folder and a serious expression that wasn't alarm, but wasn't casual either. "Early pneumonia," he said softly. "Likely bacterial. We're starting strong antibiotics now. She'll need to stay a few days. Then we reassess." Grace went pale. Her free hand covered her mouth as if holding the fear inside would keep it from spilling into the room. Logan felt her body sway slightly, and he steadied her with one arm around her shoulders. Ellie shifted in her sleep, a small whimper escaping her. Logan leaned closer immediately, smoothing her hair back, his fingertips trembling despite his effort to stay calm. A little after 2 in the morning, Grace's eyes finally closed in the chair, not sleep so much as collapse. Logan stayed awake, sitting rigidly at Ellie's bedside, listening to the soft electronic pulse of the monitor and the faint hush of the hallway beyond the door. Then his phone vibrated. Once, twice, again. Logan glanced down. Patrick's name lit the screen like a flare. Logan stepped into the hallway and pulled the door nearly shut behind him. The corridor smelled like sanitizer and stale coffee. Somewhere down the hall, a vending machine hummed. He answered in a whisper. "Patrick." "Logan," Patrick said, voice tight and frayed. "We have a problem. A huge one." Logan's chest tightened. "Talk to me." "Our central servers got hit," Patrick said. "Client data. Everything. Dinex is compromised. The press already has wind." Logan felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him. Dinex wasn't just a client. Dinex was gravity, keeping everything else from drifting apart. "How bad?" Logan asked, forcing his voice to stay level. "Worst case," Patrick admitted. "Millions exposed. They're threatening to sue. Our stock is already sliding. We need you here. Now." Logan's eyes flicked to the hospital room door. Behind it, Ellie slept with an IV line taped to her arm. Grace sat slumped in a chair, trusting that for once she didn't have to carry the entire weight alone. Logan's throat tightened. The old Logan would have already been driving. The old Logan would have said family later. Fire now. Inside the room, Ellie made a small sound, half awake. "Daddy?" Logan went back in immediately, phone still in his hand but forgotten. Ellie's eyes cracked open, glassy with fever and medicine. "I'm here," he said, voice soft. He took her hand carefully around the tape and tubing. Ellie's fingers curled weakly around his. "Are you going to stay?" The question landed heavier than any boardroom ultimatum. Ellie's gaze searched his face, pleading and exhausted, as if she'd been carrying a fear she couldn't name. Logan looked at her small hand around his finger. He looked at the IV drip, the monitor, the hospital bracelet on her wrist. proof she needed him in ways no contract ever could. His phone vibrated again in his pocket, insisting, impatient. Ellie swallowed, eyes drifting closed. "Promise you won't go away again," she murmured. Logan's chest tightened until it hurt. The choice clarified with brutal simplicity. "I promise," Logan said, steady and absolute. "I'm not going anywhere." Ellie's grip loosened as she drifted back to sleep, comforted by the sound of his voice more than any medicine. Logan rose and stepped back into the hallway. Grace followed, rubbing her eyes, fear sharpening her face again when she saw the phone in his hand. "What is it?" she asked, voice low. Logan told her, quickly, plainly. "Hack. Dinex. Press. Jobs. Lawsuits." Grace listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving his. When he finished, she exhaled slowly. "You have to go," she said, surprising him. "It's your company." Logan shook his head once. "I'm not leaving her," he said. "Not tonight." Grace's lips parted, disbelief and something else flickering across her expression. "Logan, I can fight both," he said, calmer now. "But I'm fighting from here." He dialed Patrick back before fear could creep in. When Patrick answered, Logan's voice was firm, controlled. "I'm staying at the hospital," Logan said. "Set up a video conference. Get legal and PR on. Pull the incident logs. Start a timeline. I want every access record, every alert, every timestamp." Patrick's frustration crackled through the line. "They want you in person. Then they can see me on camera," Logan replied. "And if they care about solutions, they'll stay on the call." He ended the call and pocketed the phone. Grace stared at him like she was seeing a different man than the one she'd left behind. "You're risking everything," she whispered. Logan glanced through the glass panel of Ellie's door, watching the steady rise of her chest. "No," he said quietly. "I'm choosing what's irreplaceable." Spring arrived quietly, as if the city had agreed to breathe again. 3 months had passed since the hospital nights of fluorescent light and whispered promises. The air now carried warmth instead of antiseptic. Trees along the sidewalks wore new leaves, the color of fresh beginnings, and the sunlight lingered longer against windows that once reflected only gray. Logan stood in his office, staring at a contract spread across his desk. The paper was thick, expensive. The skyline beyond the glass shimmered under afternoon light. But for once, the view didn't feel like a measure of worth. Patrick leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed. "You're really going through with this," he said, not accusing, not approving, just observing. Logan picked up the pen. Selling 40% of the company would have been unthinkable once. He had built Tech Vision from nothing but stubbornness and caffeine. Control had been oxygen. Authority had been armor. Now, it felt like something heavier. "It's the right move," Logan said calmly. "It stabilizes the company. It protects the team. And it gives me room to breathe." Patrick studied him. "You used to say control was everything." Logan gave a small smile, one that didn't carry arrogance anymore. "I used to be wrong about a lot of things." He signed. The pen's scratch against paper was soft but definitive. Control shifted. Structure changed. His title would no longer be absolute, but the company would survive. And he would no longer belong to it entirely. When Logan stepped out of the building that afternoon, he didn't check his watch to see what meeting he was late for. Instead, he checked his phone for a message with a sunflower emoji beside it. Ellie had insisted on using emojis to confirm plans. He walked 3 blocks to a small community garden tucked between apartment buildings. The space smelled of damp soil and early blossoms. Wooden planter boxes lined narrow paths, each labeled with handwritten names. A low fence separated the garden from the street, as if protecting something fragile. Grace was already there, kneeling beside a planter box with Ellie. Her hair moved softly in the breeze, no longer pulled tight in constant readiness. Ellie wore bright sneakers and held a small watering can that looked oversized in her hands. "Daddy," Ellie called, spotting him instantly. The word still struck him in the chest every time, like something sacred spoken out loud. He crossed the path and crouched beside her. In the soil, a sunflower stood tall and strong, its yellow petals fully open toward the sun. It had started as a fragile sprout during Ellie's recovery, something to care for when she wasn't strong enough to run. Now it was bold, unapologetically alive. "It grew even more," Ellie announced proudly. "It's almost as tall as me." Logan ran his fingers gently along one leaf. "It's perfect," he said. Grace stood, brushing dirt from her knees. She looked at Logan, and there was no guarded edge in her expression anymore, only something steadier, warmer. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. Logan exhaled, letting tension he'd been carrying for years finally ease from his shoulders. "It's done," he said. "Meridian's in. The team's safe." "And you?" Grace asked. Logan considered the question honestly. "I'm lighter." Ellie tugged on his sleeve. "We're having a picnic," she declared, "to celebrate the flower." They spread a bright blanket beside the planter. Grace unpacked sandwiches and fruit. Ellie carefully arranged napkins like she was hosting royalty. The sunlight pooled around them, soft and golden. Logan sat cross-legged, Ellie leaning against him without hesitation. He felt the weight of her small body and understood something with a clarity he'd never known before. Nothing he had built in glass towers compared to this. Ellie held up her juice box. "To our flower," she announced solemnly. Logan and Grace raised their cups. "To growth," Logan said. Ellie grinned. "And to ducks," she added randomly. Grace laughed. The sound easy, unguarded. They ate slowly, talking about school projects and upcoming field trips. Ellie described how her teacher said, "Sunflowers turn toward the sun because they know where the light is." Logan caught Grace's eyes at that. "Smart flower," he murmured. Ellie wandered off briefly to inspect a ladybug crawling along the edge of the planter. Logan and Grace remained seated side by side, close but not rushed. Grace reached for his hand without ceremony, fingers intertwining like it had never been unnatural. "You chose," she said quietly. Logan looked at her. "I should have chosen sooner." Grace shook her head slightly. "You chose when it mattered." Silence settled between them, not the heavy silence of avoidance, but the calm kind that followed storms. Ellie returned and plopped down between them, forcing their hands apart so she could grab one of each. "Are we a real family now?" she asked, eyes bright. Logan felt Grace's gaze meet his over Ellie's curls. "We always were," Grace said gently. "We just needed time to figure it out." Ellie seemed satisfied with that. She leaned back, resting against both of them, Sunflower towering behind her like a bright witness. Logan looked at the flower again. It had started as something fragile and uncertain, planted during recovery, tended carefully, watered with patience. It had grown not because it was forced, but because it was given light. Logan wrapped one arm around Ellie and reached for Grace's hand again with the other. The city noise beyond the garden felt distant, muted by leaves and laughter. He had lost control of a company once, and nearly lost something far more important in the process. Now he understood that growth required risk, and love required presence. The sunflower turned slightly in the breeze, its face angled toward the sun. And this time, Logan knew exactly where his light was.